Warning, the following audio transmission is based on theory and is intended for entertainment purposes only. It's Doomsday and its affiliates will not be held liable for anything your dumbass does. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome, everybody, to It's Doomsday podcast. Today is March 24th, 2022. Time is 10:34 in the p.m., and we're back with A Dark Glimpse Part 2. If you guys haven't listened to Part 1 yet, you need to go back and listen to that, or this one's not going to make much sense. But before we get into this, coming back is Shawn P. Starry. You can find him on TikTok at Shawn P. Starry, all right? Find me on TikTok at It's Doomsday Podcast 2.0. Find Al on TikTok at big_daddy_prep. The email, it's doomsdaypodcast@gmail.com. And once again, I'm going to shut up and we're going to get right to it. I hope you guys enjoyed part 1. Let me know. Give me some feedback, guys. I got you. And Shawn, I'll tell you what, we man, the things you tell me in here, they blow my mind. I mean, some stuff, it's like I've had a glimmer of insight into this, but it's kind of like I'm missing pieces to the puzzle, and you fill in those pieces, which is awesome. And I know everybody appreciates you having here. I'm looking at the chats here, and everybody's really, really appreciating the conversation. I did want to give an opportunity, since we are in the second hour here, I did want to give an opportunity for a couple people to call in. I'm going to make this a select group of people because I want to have a good, intelligent conversation going on here, and I don't want to get off track like we sometimes do on this show. But I was going to give an opportunity for Red Pill to call in because he's right up your alley. He knows a lot of what's going on with this kind of stuff. And I think you guys could have a good conversation together. And also, if Raccoon wants to call in, he's more than welcome to as well. If not, we're just going to keep on going. Thank you, King Troy, for the gift.
I have a quick question. What are the nuclear implications of a civil war here in the United States?
Okay, if a nuclear ballistic missile was to be used, they're not going to use it to decimate a city. The reason for this is because they want to keep the infrastructure as intact as possible because they don't want to have radiation fallout. If they were to use an ICBM, my belief is that they're going to send it into the stratosphere, which is pretty much you're eclipsing between the where the ozone layer is, which is just before space.
Do it as an EMP?
Yes, and they'll detonate it in the center of the United States, which would allow a blackout.
Red Pill, you got a little bit of an echo there, bud.
Wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's a little one. But I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. Welcome in, Red Pill. I'm sure you've got some questions for Shawn here as well. And then once again, Red Pill is highly steeped in this information, Shawn. I feel like it's going to be a really good conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed is that you're going to see a lot of our former military going up against our current military, and when they start losing, because this is by design, that's when you're going to see the UN peacekeeping forces step in, and then it no longer becomes a civil war, but rather an outright global war.
Yes.
And so a lot of the things that you're going to find in this so-called inoculation is that there are a lot of different variables within the MRC5s that, will completely devastate a person's ability to fight off any type of infection. Where, this way they will actually introduce real legitimate types of bioweapons that will wipe out a population. And then you're left basically defenseless because you have no immune system to fight it off with. So I see this as a real huge threat. And you see, the problem is that they overstepped and they allowed too many cracks, too many flaws to be seen with this, because they ran several different computer simulations, and each time that they would run these computer simulations, it always came up with the same thing, and that is there was a great awakening happening. The elites, the globalists, they panicked, they pressed forward way too soon, and that's where you're seeing a lot of these various interest groups that are basically, they're writing all this information down, they're keeping records of everything, they're exposing this little bits at a time so everybody sees this. So this release of information, I mean, this is not a psyops like QAnon or anything like that. This is actual legitimate stuff that that we're seeing, and it's kind of interesting because there's no possible way that the globalists can win if everybody in the entire planet has been awakened to all of this, because literally it's the billions fighting the billionaires, and they would simply run out of ammunition to fight everybody off with. So they're having to, react in this manner where they have to be proactive and basically killing everybody off that are sterilizing them. So this way, they have less people to fight them off whenever they go down, because you see, they've been stealing from, like the American taxpayer and, various other governments for literally centuries. And, this is like, nobody feels like they owe the government, 30 some odd trillion dollars for bailing out these socialist banks that took over, from the Federal Reserve and all this stuff. Because it's like, these are some crazy psychotic people, and the best thing that they could have done for themselves was to try to impose this type of bio warfare, to where this way, look, they're not afraid to nuke the planet, but they would rather do it to where they didn't have to destroy anything if they didn't have to.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what they want, is they want to be able to take the entire infrastructure with very little or no resistance, and that's their ultimate agenda. I go back to what I said previously. It's easier to control 500 million people than it is to try to control 8.5 billion people.
So what's the end goal for all this? I mean, we have civil war, we have all this stuff you guys talk about. What's the end goal for these people, though?
Well, the end goal is simply a one world government, domination and control over every aspect of everyone's lives. Because when your numbers get down to 500 million people, these rich people, these elites, the ones who are behind all of this, they stand to gain a much greater profit down the road.
But this is what I keep telling everyone, like, for them to have the profits that they do in the, like, okay, you make money because of what money can buy you and what it can do for you, right? All the luxuries that come with money. But if you eliminate the population from, what is it now, 6 billion people down to 500 million, you have no one to operate those luxuries. You're basically going back to the Stone Age. So,
well,
Hey preppers, do you want 10% off survival food? Go to www.readywise.com and use code DOOM10 at checkout for 10% off all your survival food needs. Again, that's code DOOM10 at checkout at readywise.com, DOOM10 for 10% off at readywise.com.
not entirely, because we're in the we're in the digital age now. We have more and more robotics available. You'll see what you'll see is more so is there's a large explosion of AI technology and robotics. So those AI and robotics are going to pick up a large slack of the physical labor workforce. For example, you know, if you have a factory that produces microchips, you don't need to have human hands to handle that. You just need one operator to basically run an entire factory, just inputting codes of lines into a computer, instructing the computers what to do, and the computers do it themselves. We're starting to see vehicles that are being operated by computers as there's no truck driver. You're going to get into a lot of that. Um, Most of the labor force, of the human labor force anyway, is going to be doing more of the dirty work, might be mining for the lithium, for the minerals, but you'll see a lot of computers involved in that as well. So essentially, they reduce the human population to 500 million. They can logistically, they can get away with making even more money based off of just using computers because the computers will do the large bulk of the work. As traditionally in the past, we've always relied on humans to do the assembling, the creation, with the AI computers. All you have to do is take a look at Elon Musk and what he's accomplished in 2 short years. He's able to take a rocket, launch it, and then not only bring the rocket back down, but land it on a pad out in the middle of the ocean successfully. So you're going to see people like Elon Musk even benefit from this. He's going to be far more wealthier than any of us could ever imagine. Um, and folks like him are going to have the resources available, which is the money, to essentially control and dictate how the rest of the general population lives. So it's that's just a reality that is happening, and it's literally unfolding right before our eyes. And it's just what's sad is that a lot of folks just don't see that because everything is sugar coated. Um, there's a fine line between genius and madness, and what to push that genius into madness is just keep giving them money. Keep setting up scenarios so he can keep building more and more money, and that's his end goal is to achieve a goal of having a limited supply of money. Whereas people like you and I, we would have to resort back to the Stone Age to just to find food. Now, I'll give you one very good example in all of this. Take a look at post World War II Russia. Now, they suffered a massive financial collapse in economic proportions, okay? And a lot of people in certain bigger cities were well, they were killed, okay? They were falsely accused, sent to the gulag, and they were killed. Now, the people that lived out the country, they had to go back to relying on their ability to catch and kill wildlife. But the problem with that is wildlife started to run out, and a lot of the wildlife that was left kind of wised up and figured out how to hide. So folks were eating rats, they were eating kitty cats. In fact, there was a lot of cannibalism that was going on at that time. And this is not something that's far fetched from what can happen in the future from this point on out. Um, in history, is many times, many certain circumstances where people ended up resorting to cannibalism because they couldn't rely on the government for assistance. Because at that point, the government has total control, total autonomy over every aspect of that person's life. So a lot of people end up starving to death. Some people, they resorted to cannibalism, or eating their household pets, whatever it took. And that's why it is super essential that people get into prepping, because it's going to be ugly. It's going to be a long, hard brawl, basically. Um, the, 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 the secret to all of this is just to outlast it, you know, just outlast it. Write everything down, document everything, because down the road, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren, and our great great grandchildren, um, they're going to want to know the history. They're going to want to know exactly how this all happened. More details, the better, because, uh, like I say, I go back to not trusting the government with our education, because look at what it's done already. So when we pass down this information to our generations, these generations are going to learn. Now, as this may spin, you get about 10 generations down the road, that information starts to get watered down. Take it through your traditional textbooks. You can see a lot of that stuff's been watered down. However, if your great 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 grandparents had a diary of some sort where they kept all this information from the Civil War, okay, how everything transpired, how the decline of society that led to the Civil War, and the post-Civil War, how the country was trying to find its way into recovery, you would see that there is so much similarities of what happened then that is happening now. And you could basically use that as a map, a guideline, to actually see what's the next step in the course of the government's actions, I should say the Congress action, in regarding all of this. So that's why I say it's super, super important that people just keep documenting, because, if you get something, um, viable information off the internet, and that is true, it's not some media propaganda. Like, for example, when President Trump declassified the CIA files just before he left office. Now, I have all of that, and I'm storing, not only store it, but I printed them out. I have a little kind of a diary in a sense. So everything's outlined so that future generations, my kin, will have access to that. And they can see, okay, this is how it happened. And my role in it and our role in it is super, super important. So hopefully the future generations will figure out a way to prevent this from happening again.
So why not just do the EMP, or why not just cut the power out and just let it unfold from there? Like, why don't they just do that?
Well, hold on real quick before you answer that, Shawn. To your point about generations forgetting history, it's amazing to me how many people nowadays don't know about the Holocaust or what it entailed.
Exactly.
Yeah. I just had to throw that out there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that is the reason why we need to continue to document everything. When I worked in security, as you have, we always knew that whenever there was an incident, even not when there was no incident, we always documented everything that happened, what we did, what we saw, what time, the date, who was involved, the color, you know, right down to the fine detail, because those details make up what actually happened as an eyewitness. So that down the road, if this person decides to sue, the client or the company we work for, we have an undisputable amount of evidence, which is the eyewitness account from us, and in such great detail that whatever story that this person is supposedly suing us for is going to fall through the cracks because it's not going to be believable by any jury, simply because his story has a lot of holes in it. So that's why the details are, extremely important. And we have a lot of details of our history that has been slowly washed out of our books. Just like you said, we got kids today who don't even know about the Holocaust, and that's because they took civics out. And civics, the reason why civics was important was because of all those details. And to answer your question about the EMP, the reason why they're not going to use the EMP outright is because our military is still strong at this point. So our military has their own source of electrical power that is protected within mountains or limestone hills. A lot of the bases have some sort of makeshift Faraday cage, in an essence. So
Right, Shawn, this
not
would only affect the citizens. It's not going to affect the government. They're prepared for this.
exactly. They've had years and years and years. We're talking probably 80 to 90 years worth of preparing for an eventuality like this.
That's why.
And Shawn,
That's why. That's why. Oh, go
wait,
ahead.
hold on real quick, Michael. Shawn, we got a chat for you in the comments from Mike of Tampa Bay. He says, ask Shawn about this disruptive technology if it's still a viable option.
What technology is he talking about?
I don't know. He just said ask him about disruptive technology if it's still a viable option.
Oh, disruptive technology.
Disruptive. Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe I
Disruptive.
said that a little bad. I'm sorry.
Yes, EMP, electromagnetic pulse, is one part of it. Other disruptive would be um, based through technology, the control of information flow, which means is they can literally shut down airwaves. Um, they have the satellite capabilities to what they call a blackout zone. They can cause a radio wave blackout zone, which means there's no one or anyone with a ham radio would not be able to effectively communicate with another person. A lot of the radio waves will be scrambled, so you won't be able to hear what somebody else is saying, and they won't be able to hear what you're saying. Even though your antenna's putting out that power, it still won't be able to get to where it's going because they have that disruptive ability to do that. We've done this with Iraq through the AWAC airplanes. Um, we use the disruptive forces that way. Um, they can also attach to, then use a LiDAR, which is basically what the U.S. Geological Survey uses to be able to penetrate the ground to take pictures. It's not very hard. They can retune it to cause a blackout spot. Maybe there's a band of patriots who have been hitting convoys. So what they'll do is they just before they move a convoy or they're going to, talk about sending a convoy out, they'll black out that area. So there's absolutely no electronic communication. So the only way they'd be able to do it is if somebody inside the military was a mole and had to physically themselves go to that location to give out that information, or they'd have to pass it off through paper, a means of paper communication. Um, so yeah, our government has that capability.
And I don't know if Michael, does that answer your question as far as the EMPs go?
Well, going back to what you said about, well, the government's prepared for it and it would only affect the civilians. Well, isn't that who they want to affect? Like, wouldn't the government just be okay with cutting the power off, be it EMP or just shutting the power grid down for civilians? Because then the civilians would have a, excessive need for the government and military intervention to try and keep things under control, to try and get supplies to the civilians. Why wouldn't they just go ahead and do that and blame it on Russia?
See, that's the thing is, they need to weaken our military forces. They need to weaken them in the utmost way, so that they end up becoming either compliant or they're not in their service. So at that point, the UN can come in as the primary force, and from that point on, they can disrupt the entire electrical grid. And at that point, we know at that point, okay, well, we're still gonna be going to the government, saying, hey, help us with whatever. But the thing is that we're not gonna be able to get that communication out to the government. Okay, the only people that are gonna have access to communication is going to be the UN personnel or the UN troops. Okay, I'll give you one very good example. So in the latest Red Dawn movie, you see where they had an EMP of some kind that disrupted that Seattle power grid, right? And the rebels that were fighting these Chinese troops saw that they had this black box, and that's how they communicate. So you're going to see the exact same thing, but the movie Red Dawn always ends with the rebels winning, the American citizens fighting back and eventually winning. So whether we know it or not, our government has been studying those movies as part of their playbook. So they run these scenarios and they know, okay, well, we can't just send an EMP device, whether it's through ballistic missiles or whatever. We can't just shut off the entire country and then try to attack the military. We need to weaken the military all the way around. So much to the point that they can't fight back, and the ones that are there are going to be compliant, and they're not gonna have much of a choice. Okay, it's going to be thinned down so drastically. Then they do the EMP, then we're virtually back in, like I said, or we were saying, we're back into that kind of a Stone Age period where we're not going to have electricity for our basic household needs, or even much less for transportation. So it's going to make moving around almost virtually inaccessible. So we'd have to find other means and methods to be able to move around, and they're going to be watching for any vehicles that are moving around, whether it's through drones or whether it's through an AWAC airplane, whether it's through a LiDAR airplane. They're going to be monitoring those without our consent. So that's the challenge. That's the real challenge. That's the playbook that I've seen when I was in the service on how anyone could. It's the only way they could defeat the United States is they have to remove the military first. They have to decentralize it, demoralize it. They have to basically just make it virtually impossible for an organized military group, okay, to still have access to electricity, to power, to vehicles, to have everything in working order. They have to take control of their bases first. They'll utilize their bases, but they're going to leave the rest of the country without power. So it gives them the tactical advantage.
And the other thing that bothers me, though, is because, we talk about history and people not knowing history. Do these people not know history? Because when you look back, the last time a civilization that was it still wasn't even close to the power for that time of what the United States has. But the last time something even remotely similar to us fell, they went back in time for like 1,000 years. Like they, when the Roman Empire fell, and it didn't even fall in the kind of way that you're talking about. I mean, people went from having running water and indoor plumbing to not having that again for another 1,000 years almost.
For a long time, yes. Yeah, and that's the thing is if you have a country that you're trying to take over and you leave them virtually, inaccessible without any electricity or vehicles to say, um, you have a complete control of that entire country. So what's going to happen is they'll slowly integrate a lot of this stuff back after they've collapsed our government, got rid of the Constitution, and just abolished our way of life and forced us into slavery. Because at that point, once we're in slavery and we're in chains, we're not going to have that. We're not going to have, and not only that, but we have a generation or several generations that were taught watered down history, or if any, no history at all, or they were taught alternative history, which is based on this whole concept of progressive liberal ideology to focus on the situation with slavery and the division of everything, and that itself would be something that will continue on because of the younger generation, because they're not going to see beyond that until future generations down the road come along, and they're not going to buy into that bullshit because everybody's a fucking slave. Well, at that point, they're going to say, you know what, your crap makes no sense at all, and that's the generation that's going to have to figure out how to take this country back, and that's the generation that's going to have to do the rediscovering of who we were. And so that's why I say it's essential to document everything, write everything down, every detail, because at that generation, we are going to allow them that information, because information is power. And so dumbing down our society to the point that they don't know why they're fighting. They just become compliant because it's progressive,
Shawn,
all
I want to so someone in the chat, James of the Slightly Serious Show, is asking if you could go through the next 2 week scenario again. People in the chats are curious about that. If you want to go through that, I'm sorry to keep asking. I know I've asked you to go through it twice already, but if you want to go through it again, there's people in the chats requesting it.
No, that's fine. So you're going to see within the next 2 weeks, there's going to be another pandemic, another coronavirus, mutant variant, whatever you want to call it. It's going to spring about. Okay, this is another false flag event. This is going to usher in where the federal government is going to clamp down on state governments to do a lockdown. Okay, but I believe they're going to do it on a federal level, which means is they're going to lock down the entire country by declaring a national martial law, which means is governments will either have to comply or federal government comes in and basically takes over, and they'll do it through sanctions. They'll do it through through the military-industrial complex, which is the mercenaries, and through the United Nations. So at that point, that's when they're going to mandate, okay, well, you don't have a choice. You have to get this new vaccine shot, and this vaccine shot is going to be loaded with a microchip along with parasites, and these parasites are biologically engineered, so that they multiply slowly over the duration of the next 6 months to 2 years. So at that point, those folks that have gotten it, when you want to go buy gas, you want to go buy food, you get your bare necessities, you have to scan your way in. And once the parasites simply start showing up in the biological system, the microchips will sunset and they will send that information through the scanners. So this is where we're going to get into getting into your separating and dividing people up. Your top 1% of the wealthy people in all the world will not be taking this shot. They don't need to, according to them. Everybody else will have to, because they'll try to push the propaganda right along with all of this, because they know that they have sympathizers and supporters out there who are gullible because of the dumbed down education. So we get into that point where now we either have to resist 100% and risk everything to fight for our freedom, our medical freedom, or we comply just so that we can get enough food and gas and be able to go to work for the next 6 months to a year. And by then, you're going to start to see more and more people are going to get sick and die, and they're going to start dropping like flies. That's where you see the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. And that's just going to push them even further to really start clamping down on everyone. Basically restrict our movements and our ability to communicate. You're going to see interruption in the internet. You're going to see interruption in the cell services. And that's where the 5G comes in to play, is that these 5G towers can be controlled from satellites, whereas traditionally before the 1G, 2G, 3Gs, they were more operated on higher level radio waves that have to be disrupted from on the ground. 5Gs can be disrupted from satellites in space. Then it's going to usher in a civil war. And along with that, the military has been demoralized. They have been decimated at that point. You're going to see a lot of people being discharged, honorably or dishonorably. You'll see a bunch of them locked up. You'll see a bunch of them just honorably discharged. Higher ranking officials will be compliant because this is their career. This is risking everything if they don't take the shot. But you're going to see a lot of them get sick and die along the way. The UN simply just slowly just takes over. And at that point, we're really going to be in over our heads. But the White Hats, they do have a plan, and they're simply exploiting the weak points that the Black Hats are doing. So they're allowing the Black Hats to play it out because they know that they're going to make all the wrong moves. So, you know, Bishop to Rook, okay, we took the Ukraine situation. The Russians are, Putin is part of the whole process of exposing all of this information. But we're going to see a lot of support down the road
I've
from
heard
the
it said a
Russian
couple of
and
times
the
before that Putin was actually a white hat.
Putin is part of the White Hat.
Okay, well, that would explain why he's taking out all of the Russian biolab. I mean, the Ukrainian biolabs, which all of the there's a lot of politicians that have vested interest in these biolabs, and
Yes.
Putin is not having any part of that. And there's a lot of people that are
No.
saying that he's actually a black hat, and it's like it's hard to tell with him because he is former KGB, but however, he's looking out for the best interest of his people. Now, the thing that I kind of have to wonder about is if they do enact martial law, that gives legitimacy to each and every one of the statements of the Nuremberg Code being broken. That,
Yes.
if it does get declared as martial law, then we can actually have a leg to stand on as far as having crimes against humanity charges filed and actually having them stick because there
Yeah.
are a number of people that have like I said, this has been a bioweapons release. They have enacted elimination protocols, and they're using subversion from within because they can't take on the U.S. military in a more traditional sense. So they have to go the subversive route and destroy from within. It's basically like a cancer, and you have to
Exactly.
excise it and cut it out from within.
Yes, and you know what's funny is Muhammad Gaddafi, when he was the leader of Iran, okay, before he was
You
assassinated
mean Libya?
by our CIA, or Libya, my apologies. Yes, Libya. Before he was assassinated by our CIA, he said very clearly that um, the United States would not be destroyed with an outright fight with tanks and airplanes, but he said the United States will be destroyed from within. And by through the
Abraham Lincoln said the
socialization.
exact same thing.
Yeah, yeah, and Lincoln said the same thing as well. So we have, we can't just dismiss, this. If you want to call him a tyrant, okay, if Muhammad Gaddafi, you want to call him a tyrant, okay, that's fine. But we can't dismiss what he says because it goes in line exactly with what Lincoln said. So, as you notice now, well, the last 2 years, they have been trying to topple statues of our former politicians, great ones like George Washington, Paul Revere, George or Abraham Lincoln, and not just
Those
trying to
who fail to
topple the
learn from history
statues.
are doomed to repeat it.
They're trying to basically reverse engineer the message is these people were racist. Okay, so the word racism actually comes from a Russian propaganda minister back at the time when it was a communist country. So this playbook has been thoroughly thought out, thoroughly planned, and it's been wrote up since I want to say 1980s, the mid 80s, when this book came out. And only a very
No,
few
this has
people
actually been
know.
going on since the 1830s.
Yeah, that's the
When you want to
the
talk
final.
about the five major families, yes, this has been going on since the 1830s. This started with the Industrial Revolution and collectivism, and how that led to Karl Marx writing about, um, communist theory. And
Hmm.
then from that point on, it's like, here is somebody who has never, you know, toiled in the ground a day in his life talking about collectivism. And then, the restructuring of the banking system. This has been an ongoing thing by the group of the five families that, they own
Exactly.
everything. They've got 400 trillion tons of gold sitting in the mountains of Switzerland, and it's guarded by the most heavily guarded mercenary force the world has ever seen. These people
Yep.
are psychotic.
Yep.
In
And
Red Pill, Eric's got a comment in the chats for you. It says America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we lose our freedom, it will be because we have destroyed ourselves from within. 16th President Abraham Lincoln. Thank you for that, Eric.
exactly. And that's where we get into all these tactics of division, okay? And then when the pandemic came out about, they used the propaganda of fear to make people compliant. And they saw exactly how compliant people were. Um, and at first, not oh, there's not there's a there's a few of us kept saying no, don't be compliant, don't be compliant. But there was a lot of people that fell in line and decided, okay, we're going to take this vaccine shot, or a second vaccine shot, a third vaccine shot, and these booster shots, and they say, oh well, I got this vaccine card, I can go anywhere I want. Well, those are the people that are the younger generation. These are the people who were their education was whitewashed. You get into the X generation, the baby boomers, those are the only ones that are still resistant to and know that this is wrong. They know that um, this is not who we are as a country, and they know something is not right. And so when they start asking questions and poking holes at everything that's going on along the way, we're turning things up. We're actually turning up real time evidence, and we're saying, okay, and they start adding them up together to get a picture. And now we're starting to see the picture very clearly. Oh, this is the reason why they did this. That's
Hey,
how they
Shawn,
started.
I'd like for you
Oh,
to go to the BitChute platform, and I'd like for you to look up a 12-hour movie. It's called Europa: The Last Battle. And before you
okay.
start believing that it's some white supremacist shit, you should know that it was suggested to me by two black men. And it shows that everything that we have learned through our history books is a complete lie. I was
Yes.
surprised at the number of black soldiers that were fighting for the Nazis. It was mind blowing to me.
Yeah. Yeah. If you take a look at the Civil War, um, there were uh, black individuals that fought for the South. Um, and whereas traditionally, you know, a lot of people were not taught that in school because over the last 2 or 3 generations, they've literally whitewashed that completely out. Um, now the Democrats know that they lost that war, okay, and so now they're flipped the script and they're using that against anybody who is white, for example. But they indoctrinated the schools by using the liberals to further their little wicked agenda of perversing the entire education system. And they basically utilizing all this stuff so that we get to the point where we are today where people are rediscovering the actual history. Oh, oh my God, this actually happened. Or they start questioning the history that they were taught, you know. And I've seen a whole lot of people, a whole lot more people now that are waking up. They're starting to see the truth, starting to add things up together themselves, and they're not okay with what's going on. And that's the one reason why I agreed to come on the show tonight was because I want to show the rest of the picture, the rest of the picture for the future. Because everything that we've gone through in the last 90 to 100 years, um, this is all painting what we're getting to that apex in our society. And when we reach that apex, it's not going to be comfortable. It's going to take everybody out of that comfort zone. And they're going to have to rediscover how to live on a day to day basis, how to function, how to get around, how to socialize. Because at that point, we're not going to have the internet's not going to be available to us. Cellular service is not going to be available to us. And we would be darn lucky if we actually have a landline, but we might only be able to call into a doctor or to a government official only. Just the same way communist Russia did with its own people.
So I
They
have,
even restricted mail services. So if somebody wanted to mail something out, the government would go through your mail first, just to make sure you're not writing any Western conspiracy things, or so they say. And if you did, then they would use that against you and simply take you and put you in a concentration camp.
uh,
Because
sorry, real quick. Before you go too far away from this, I wanted to ask you about something you said. You brought up how, when they roll out the vaccine, how compliant everyone was, and how the younger generation was brainwashed because of their education, that the baby boomers are the ones that, still at least realize that, what's all going on. But actually the numbers don't support that. It actually is the opposite, because if you look at vaccination rates and not just CDC reports, but state level reports, I mean, just anything, and just based off people I know and how they feel, the baby boomers have the highest vaccination rates. And it's like almost probably closer to 90%. And it's actually the younger group that are like my age, like the millennials and stuff, that have more distrust in the government and far lower vaccination rates. And we're the least compliant with all that.
Hey preppers, do you want 10% off survival food? Go to www.readywise.com and use code DOOM10 at checkout for 10% off all your survival food needs. Again, that's code DOOM10 at checkout at readywise.com, DOOM10 for 10% off at readywise.com.
Yeah, it depends on, and now that's something that depends on your area, the location where you live. Now, for example, I live in the state of Illinois, so this is literally a Democrat-run state, okay? Republicans here, where we are, we are literally the minority, okay? Um, so a lot of the Republicans here were pressured by Democrats into falling in line with their agenda. Um, and I know a few friends that I live with in town here were pressured into getting the first dose vaccine anyway. Um, once I met up with them after the first shot, I started sharing actual facts and actual evidence. Um, then they started questioning, they started, well, this doesn't add up, this doesn't make sense. I said, yeah. But you take a look at the majority of the Democrats in the state, most of them have gotten the vaccine. Now, when I worked at a vaccine center, which was run by the U.S. Army, for 19 days that I was there, 19 people died. And at least 3 people a day of those 19 days were severely injured by the vaccine shots. So my particular job and my involvement in that was whenever there was a reaction, I have to go back with the Army personnel while they're working on this person behind a white curtain. I have to keep the family members out. And then if that person dies, they tap me on the shoulder. I have to walk down to the door, open up the door. There's what they call the CRT crisis response team that has a black ambulance with no markings on it. And they bring a cot in and they have a body bag. They just load the person up, put them in the body bag, zip them up, cover them with a blanket, and walk them out the door. Their family members are not allowed to see them or have any contact with them. In fact, the ones I did end up talking to a couple of family members along the course, and I gave them my phone number and I said, uh, please contact me and let me know if you've ever had the ability to be able to see your deceased loved one after all this, because I need to know. And they contacted me and they said to, they were not allowed to have a open casket visitation. In fact, they weren't even allowed to go into where the funeral home was to see the body. In fact, the body was cremated, and they were told not to do an autopsy after the person has died, which is the reason why they had the crisis response team taking the bodies to the funeral homes so they can cremate the bodies immediately. So once the bodies are cremated, there's no way to do an autopsy. Um, and they would be given the ashes in an urn um, simply because no virus is alive at that point. So then they could have their funeral services. But initially, in the beginning, all funeral services were delayed for at least 6 months. So there was a backlog of a lot of people who had passed away, but they had cremated them and put them in urns. So by the time the families decided, okay, we want to do a funeral service, then they were allowed to do a funeral service. Uh, Most places were not allowed to do a funeral service at all. So they what simply did was just give them the urn, and they take the urn home, or they take it to the cemetery, and they would have to hold the service in the cemetery.
So Sean, just real quick, Red Pill's requested that I send you his email address, so I'm going to send that to you in a chat on TikTok. So be
Okay.
sure to look for that. Definitely look for that. And guys, I just wanted to give a heads up here. We've got about 8 more minutes left. And I was on the fence about doing a second show this evening, but I'm going to leave it up to you guys in the chats if you want a second show to go on. It's obviously going to be more lax than this one. I'm just throwing that out there. And we will allow for more call-ins on the second show of the evening if we do one. But if you guys just don't mind me, guys, continue.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions or concerns about what they should do, here's my advice to you. Start prepping now, especially for medicine and for food. Those are the two most essential things that you're going to depend on. I would say, maybe stick with the dry stuff. And if you can have access, if you have access to water, great. I was like myself, I have five 55-gallon drums where I have rainwater stored into them. They're filtered out as it comes into the house. So, but start educating yourself on how to prep. And this is like I said, this is a great show to come on to learn about prepping. If you have more questions, you can ask. Anybody in the prepping community that's on this channel, on TikTok, on this particular show here, what what stuff to get. I would suggest whatever books that are available that you get your hands on. I know it's kind of late in the game, so to say, but now it's better than never because, like I said, if everything goes according to plan, we hit another lockdown, you're going to be in a pickle without having those resources available. And a lot of folks, during that time couldn't go to work. So, um, getting another stimulus check is I don't think it's going to happen. I honestly don't. If they do, it's going to be to a select group of people. And I believe they're going to be targeting the Republicans or anybody who supports constitutional freedom. So chances are they're not going to be getting any stimulus money. You're going to see more of those who are in the liberal Democrats who fall in line will be getting those. So, not only that, but we're going to see food shortages down the road here. And definitely we're going to see a major drastic change in the financial structure as well. So I would say just start prepping. And, it's spring now, and we're going to be getting into summer. So, um, canned food or I almost even suggest buying salt, a lot of salt, because you can use salt as a preservative. In other cases, you can use salt you know, for multiple use of things. So that's my suggestion to you is to start prepping now. Don't wait at the end of the day. I am building what's it called, a fuel-less generator. So I'm actually in the process of finishing it up. And once it's finished, I'm going to be shooting a video of it, and I'll be explaining in detail on how you can build it yourself. And you can use this as a means for electricity down the road. But during an event of a martial law, here's my suggestion to you, and I'll say this very plainly: black out all your windows with black paint or whatever means necessary that no light comes through. Because in the event we have martial law and the power grid shut down, you don't want to be attracting anybody to your home because you have electrical source. So, but I will release that video on TikTok and on Clapper as
If you
well.
have any 5G appliances in your house, the 5G acts on the Wi-Fi system and it can actually detect your movements inside your own home to where this way they can see wherever you're at in your own home. And I
Exactly.
thought that was kind of creepy.
Okay. So myself, I have no 5G of any kind in my home. I don't even have a power source coming from the electric pole, so my house is basically I've gone Amish in every sense in retrospect. So for that purpose, you know, and plus I live in a neighborhood that's been impacted by a flood, so this is going to be the last place that's going to come looking. But for anyone who has, any type of 5G Wi-Fi down the road, when martial law does occur, my simple suggestion is to disconnect your 5G Wi-Fi box or anything with 5G. You can stick it in a Faraday cage box, and that will block any and all transmission. They won't be able to see what you're doing. Security cameras as well, take them down. Unless you've got a direct line in security camera, which like I do, and that is not connected to any Wi-Fi or cellular device. So, um, and I will say this: I sold security cameras for quite a long time, and my company did anyway. And I've gotten into taking them apart and knowing exactly what's in them, how they operate, and how the companies that they manufacture these things, how they're actually gaining access to people's homes through these security cameras that they are buying. And once I found out, this was the reason why I shut my company down.
This is an emergency action message. At approximately 1 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, NORAD is tracking 15 ICBM nuclear missiles inbound to the following cities: Orlando, Miami, Pittsburgh, Dover, Newark, Richland, Philadelphia, New York City, Baltimore, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Boston, Seattle, Detroit. This is an extremely deadly situation. Stay tuned. The next emergency message will be a presidential address.